Lovely. Well, thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming along this evening. It's really, really good to have so many of you here. My role is small tonight, so just introducing tonight's masterclass with Johny Cassidy, who is a BBC journalist, and he is also the Vice Chair of the NUJ Disabled Members Council. I'm Natasha Hurst. I am the Disabled Members Rep on the National Executive of the NUJ, and I'm also our current president. So I'm very pleased to be able to take a back seat here and hand over to Johny, who will be leading the masterclass. So thank you, Johny, over to you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Thank you, and welcome everybody. It's so good to see so many people here. You mustn't have anything better to do on a cold autumn night, but I think it's brilliant to have you here. My name is Johny Cassidy. As Natasha says, I'm a journalist at the BBC. And this session, it's about audiences. We'll talk a bit more about that as we go on, but it's about how a good big chunk of all of our audiences access content. So before I go on any further, I'm going to try and share my screen here and give you a bit of an idea, I guess, about how a screen reader works. So let me get to the story. Can you see that? Can you hear it?
Yeah, yes, that's working, Johny.
Yeah. Here, brilliant, thank you. So, for many of you will probably know or will have heard about a screen reader and how screen readers work. So a screen reader, for those who don't know, is a piece of software, text-to-speech software that blind people like me use to navigate a lot of the digital landscape, the digital environment. So the screen reader that I use is called JAWS, and I think that stands for Job Access with Speech. It's the little symbol for it is a shark's tail. So it is JAWS. It's the most popular in the market. It's the one that we use at the BBC. It's a lot what other people use as well. So I will let you, I'll give a bit of an indication as to how I would navigate this page. So let me slow it down first of all. Slower. So you can hear it.
Spain rescuers search underground parking as fresh flooding hits Barcelona.
Rescuers hit underground parking as fresh flooding hits Barcelona. That's the headline there. Let me get down to the first image on this page, the top image that we call it.
Spain rescuers search underground parking as fresh flooding hits Barcelona, heading level 1. Has details, a firefighter stands in front of water spurting.
Can you see that image? Has that come up, or do I need to go down a bit more?
Image caption.
Could you, that's it.
You can see that, right? Okay. So let me just tell you what the alt text that is being put onto this is.
Image source, EPA, a firefighter stands in front of water spurting out of a hose with a fire appliance in the background in the Valencia region of Spain graphic.
That's not too bad. A firefighter stands holding a hose of water spurting out with something fire appliance in the background in Valencia. That's quite good. Maybe them people have been through my training. But that is how, when you come across an image, that is the information that you get about that image. So it stands a sense that if you are going to put an image up onto a piece that you're doing, that you want to have that description of what that image is as detailed as you can, for people like me that use a screen reader to interact with your content. Now, according to the Royal National Institute of Blind People, there's more than 2 million people in the UK that are living with some sort of sight loss, and across the world it's 250 million, and it's only set to get bigger as people get older. So that gives you an idea about how the screen reader works. Let me stop sharing my screen here.
To move to an item, press the arrow keys. Screen sharing meeting controls. To move to an item,
press the arrow keys. Screen sharing meeting controls.
Your screen share is up.
You can share your screen, and then I don't have to worry about anything, and I can just talk.
I said that and then realized I was still on mute. So it's all ready for you. I'm starting from the first page.
Bear with me, thank you. As I say, my name's Johny Cassidy. I'm a journalist at the BBC, and we are here tonight for this masterclass about alt text or text descriptions. Alt text makes you sort of think that it's an alternative, but as you've seen, for people like me and the millions of people like me, it's not an alternative. So instead of calling it an alt text, we will be calling it a text description because that's what it is. Slide 2, Claire, please. So this is me, and this is really where it all started for me. I was lucky enough to go to the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford University in Michaelmas term in 2022 it was. It was a BBC-sponsored fellowship, and I was the first blind fellow that they've had in the 40-year history there. And I was the only one in my cohort that was from the UK, and my research was focused on how blind audiences were being left behind in the visual data revolution. So these are complex images, all the graphs and charts and maps and infographics that have become ubiquitous, I suppose, for a lot of journalists day in, day out. We'll come on to the different types of images as we go on through it. But Claire, the next slide, please. The aims and objectives. Number one, we want to consider the text descriptions that you create as editorially relevant and as important as all of the other elements in your piece. So a lot as journalists, you will spend time creating a good headline, an SEO headline, optimized for search engines. You will spend a lot of time crafting the words. You'll spend a lot of time, hopefully, choosing the images. But we want you to think of those text descriptions as editorially relevant as all the rest of it. We will want to move away from thinking about text descriptions as an accessibility consideration. And instead, we want you to really, really consider the audience. It's not about accessibility, it's about audiences. So move away from thinking that it's an additional thing that you have to do. It is just something that you do for the audiences. So taking that as a whole, the three things is editorially relevant and as important as all of the other bits that you've done, and move away from accessibility and see it rather through the lens of the audience. Next one, Claire. What is this one? So we have got 5 different types of image, and we'll go through each of them. Some of them are more relevant than others. So the first one to think about really is decorative, and we will go through all of these. So we can break the different types of images down to 5 different types. We have got decorative, we have got informative, we have got functional, we have got images of text, and we have got complex images. So that's the stuff that I love, those maps and graphs and charts and infographics. So we'll go through each of these one by one, and I'll be showing you examples. And I'm hoping by the end of this, you might have some questions. If you do have questions as we go through, stick them into the chat, and hopefully we can come to them at the end. Next slide. So this is the first kind. It's a decorative. These are the sorts of images that you would see. Really, I guess, there's a lot of borders, a lot of, in this example, I think it's up on the screen, Claire, is it just that grey line?
It is.
So the text description for that is just something like presentational grey line, if you unveil that. But, for all intents and purposes, you don't need to give that any type of text description. And if you are doing that, if you're doing this, maybe, for example, in a Word document, you can mark something as decorative. But you have to be careful that you understand exactly what decorative is. Because there is a bit of an overlap with the next type, which is informative. But for this, if you are using a content management system, many content management systems will allow you to put in 2 quote marks, which will instruct the screen reader to look over it. Just scan over it. So instead of putting in a text description here, presentational grey line, which just becomes unnecessary noise really for a screen reader. You can just put in those double quotes, but I hope that it'll become clear, you know, that you need to be very, very careful with that, that you're not missing out on some other types of images. So Claire, the next one is informative. So an informative image does in many ways have an overlap, as I say, with a decorative. The way you have to think really about a decorative image is if you were to take that out of the piece, would it in any way have an impact on the understanding of your piece? And a lot of times when we use a stock image, you know, the simple answer is no, it wouldn't. So you could, in theory, use those double quote marks and mark an informative image like this, a stock image, as decorative. But we'll have to think about equitability, really. You have put that in for a reason, really. You know, it might be just something simple as to break up the text on your page. But the fact that you've done that offer all of your audience an equitable experience. It's really about providing that richness. And Claire, just unveil that one. You see, it's really, really simple. Just a smart meter in a kitchen or a table, whatever it says there. And the original for this, if I remember right, it just did said something like a smart meter.
A small. Oh, right. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, like the original. So what it is now is just a smart meter in a kitchen on a table with a cup and a kettle, something like that, is it, Claire? Yeah.
Yeah, a smart meter on a table with a cup and a kettle in the background.
There you go, yeah. And just adding that additional bit of detail, rather than just saying smart meter, you know, it gives a bit of an idea for a screen reader user about what that image is, what, you know, a bit more about it. And it's about richness and it's about equitability. And screen reader users will understand when you have taken a bit more time and thought and put in a bit more richness like that. And it might seem like very little to you, but what it does, as well as giving that extra bit of detail, it's a bit of a signal to screen reader users that you know that we exist, you know that that is a part of your audience, and it's saying, hey, yeah, I see you, and I put this in just that extra level of detail. So again, about equitability, but it's about understanding your audience. So the next one, Claire, this is a really interesting one. This came originally from Newsbeat. The Newsbeat and BBC have been quite good at their text descriptions, and that's because they do stories. They do a really good diverse set of stories, I would say, and they've done stories about blindness and stories about you know, how alt text has been misused in the past. So this one's pretty good to start with. I'm just unveil that one, Claire, and then I can talk through it. So it says here a court sketch of Charles Bronson. Remind me again, Claire, what it says, court sketch?
A court sketch of prisoner Charles Bronson shows him in a black suit and tie wearing a white shirt. He's wearing a pair of white glasses with black lenses. He's sat at a table which has a drink on it.
See, now that is very, very detailed. I would have thought just by adding a bit more detail, you know, you could say something like, you know, he's got a shaved head or he's got a well-dodgy moustache. You know, it adds a bit more level of detail. But the thing I want you to understand about this one is that ordinarily you wouldn't say photo off or image off because a screen reader knows. But here, the detail at the start of it is really, really useful, where it says a court sketch off. And the reason why that is that the majority of blind people that will be using a screen reader won't have been born blind. There's only a really small percentage of people that have been born blind. I think it's something like 2%. Me, for example, I didn't start losing my eyesight until I was in my 20s. So when you say court sketch off, it kicks in something that we call the visual library. So by giving that level of detail, you're already on the front foot with, right, okay, I know in my mind's eye what type of image this is. So you can think about other types that you would do that with, you know, maybe a black and white photo or a sepia photo or maybe a mugshot, you could say, or a line drawn or a watercolor off or a manga cartoon style, something like that. You know, it's just that extra little bit of description that gives a bit of a clue. So, but as I say, this one wasn't too bad to start with. I would have just made it a wee bit better with the fact he was shaven headed. That gives an understanding of the type of fella he is. And the fact he's got a moustache. So next one, Claire. Now this, I like this one now. Again, this is about richness. Claire, unveil and read that one.
Father and mother sit on the floor of their son's bedroom and play with him building bricks. A bed is seen in the background with a colourful dinosaur bed cover on it, and there is a green, orange and blue plastic table and chair set in the room.
Now this is, I want to be clear, none of these I have written, like you, so none of these alt text or these text descriptions have been written by me. These have been written by people at the BBC recently who have gone through the training that I've done. So already this is having a massive impact. You know, in the past that would have just had something really generic like family in a bedroom or something like that. So you can see just by adding that extra level of detail. Again, I'm going to talk about richness and equitability all the way through this because this is about audiences and it's about keeping that in your mind at all times that people access content in a myriad of different ways. So the next one is, this is on to the next type of image. This is functional. Now, I'm only going to show one example of this really because it's unlikely that as journalists you'll come across this too often. This is more for something that you know, if you're designing your own web pages and you're using a library of different buttons or something like that, you would want to have some sort of a text description on the function of that. But the thing to remember is that it's the action of the button or the link that you want to be aware of rather than what it looks like. So you'll see this, Claire, unveil that. You can see that there's a big difference there between what the image is and what the text description is on it. The image is, I think, is a magnifying glass, isn't it? A dark magnifying glass. But you have to say what it does, the action, because there's no point in putting the text description saying magnifying glass, because that could be a picture of a magnifying glass. You need to say what it is. You know, like the same goes for play or stop buttons or search or, you know, when you see the icons for Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever it is, you would say Facebook, you would say X, you would say LinkedIn, rather than what the icons are for it. But I would have thought, and I would assume for many people that are just using a content management system, you don't really need to worry about functional, but fundamentally the thing that you need to keep in your head is that it's the action that functional image is conveying rather than what the image is that it's there to do. Thank you. So next one is this is images of text. So with images of text, you will have heard when I did the demonstration of the screen reader, you know, that it can read down through text. But something to be really aware of is that screen readers, and this isn't strictly true, but I'm going to say this, screen readers cannot read text that has been burnt into an image. So if you have got something that is, I don't know, a picture of a road sign or something, and it's a PNG or a JPEG or a GIF or something like that that's on your page, the screen reader won't pick up the text within that. So you have to, it's very important that that text is relevant to the story. You have to convey that in your text description. Now, modern new screen readers and latest iterations of screen readers are able to utilize generative AI. So a lot more now they do and can pick up the text in an image. But for this training and for you to be able to put into your text descriptions, we're going to stick with the fact that you can't. So this is a really busy image. I don't like this image because there's just far too much going on in it to be able to ever convey it into a text description. So with something like this is where creating and writing a text description becomes more of an art than a science. You, as a journalist, will need to consider within that image what is the most relevant and most important and most pertinent information that you need to get across. So you will need to think about what it is that you want to do. So Claire, unveil that one.
A screenshot of the Genesis website with a large red banner going across the top saying, "This website has been seized."
And that is very, very, very basic considering all of the bits and elements that are going on in that image. But the first thing I want you to be aware of is the fact that it says screenshot of. So it doesn't say image of, it doesn't say photo of, it says screenshot of. So remember back to when I was talking about informative images and that visual library. The same thing would go for, you know, if it was an image of a tweet or something like that, you know, or a screen grab of a WhatsApp, you know, again, use that to do the visual library, to kick in the visual library. But with this, very important to see that there's a lot more information that is being conveyed in this. So my advice with an image like this would be to weave some of that through your copy, through the piece. And the biggest thing for me in this, I think is the most relevant, apart from the fact that the website has been seized, is just the enormity of the operation. If you look and see how many agencies, international law, criminal agencies have been involved, it really does show the breadth of it. So I would say that you could start listing that into your text description, but it just becomes a list of agencies. So I would put that in through the copy of the piece, even in your caption, or we need to get you to start thinking of a piece that you are creating in the round. Your headline is carrying information, your image is carrying information, the caption is carrying information, your text description is carrying information, and your copy is carrying information. But the fundamental point is that whatever information is available visibly should be available somewhere else. But again, with an image like this that is unbelievably busy, you're not going to get everything in. It's not by accident that there's the phrase, "A picture paints 1,000 words," and you could write 1,000 words about that, and you'll just be a bit superfluous with it. So, just think about what is the most important and pertinent bits that you want to convey. Next one. Now, this is an interesting one. Again, this is an image of a text, and this is from a story. Quite a cheeky wee story. It was, I think it was an insurance company, and they, very deep in their terms and conditions, they said that if you've read this far, you will get a free bottle of wine. And it took them over 3 months, I think, before the wine was claimed, because nobody read the terms and conditions, and that was the point of it. Quite a good PR move, because it was a good story that was picked up in a lot of places. But you'll see here that there's a lot of text on that image. And I would say that that's too much text to put into your text description. But again, very important that everybody has got access to that information. So again, I would advise here, you could say, and Claire, unveil the description.
A screenshot of website terms and conditions as posted on X.
Now, that is absolutely fine if you do what I'm going to say next, and that is to include all of that block of text in the body of your piece. And in that way, you're doing a lot more, really, accessibility-wise and audience-wise, because, and this mightn't go for a lot of other news organisations, but at the BBC, the font that we use in our content management system, the Lord Reith font, a lot of time and effort and resources has been given to make that as accessible as possible for people with different cognitive differences. People with dyslexia, for example, it's a really easy font for dyslexic people to be able to read. So by putting those terms and conditions, all of those, I think there's 6 or 7 lines, into the body of your piece, you're given access to more people than just screen reader users. So if you do that and put that into the body of your piece, then that text description, a screenshot of terms and conditions as seen in X would suffice. And again, notice it says a screenshot. Always understand that visual library. The next one, Claire. Love this. This is where it all starts for me. This is complex images. So graphs, charts, maps, infographics, all of that really good stuff that as journalists we use day in, day out. And, you know, this became one of the reasons I wanted to start looking at this research. It became really obvious during the COVID pandemic, when the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention created that flattening the curve infographic, and I should have had an example of that here, but you'll remember it. It was the one about social distancing and all the rest of it. It was amplified in newsrooms across the world, but virtually no thought or consideration was being given to how blind people would be able to access that vital health information. And it still stands, unfortunately, that, you know, journalists don't just have in mind all of their audiences at all times. And there's an irony with an image like this, that visual data journalism, things like this, pieces of data viz, they're an accessibility tool in their own right. So they're taking complicated data sets and rendering it into something that is visually very appealing and visually very accessible. Now, when I was doing my research, you know, I went down lots and lots of rabbit holes, and you can read my research, my full paper if you want, all about, you know, how the human brain has evolved over time, you know, to be able to pick up visual information like that and make a decision really, really quickly. But as we've talked about, audiences access this information in different ways. So we need to have some sort of guidance about how you're going to act with this. So Claire, just to unveil that one.
Bar chart showing drug deaths across Europe. The chart shows that Scotland has the highest instances of drug deaths at just over 300, with Lithuania at the lowest with fewer than 50.
So this is what we call the minimum viable product. This is a very bare minimum that we can do with a chart like this. So it's explaining what type of chart it is. Here it's a bar chart. It's explaining what it is, drug deaths across Europe, and it's explaining what the trend is. That Scotland has got the highest and Lithuania has got the lowest. Now, as I say, that is a very, very bare minimum that you should be aiming for. But because you will see in this chart, there is a lot more data points than that. If I, for example, wanted to look at that and see where Ireland's at in comparison to Scotland or in comparison to Lithuania, there's nowhere in that bar chart that I was going to be able to get that information. So what you would have to do is either put that into the body of your piece in an alternative format, a bulleted list with the different data points, or a really well formatted HTML table. And if you're not going to do that, then you need, unfortunately, to put all of those data points into your text description. I would say that becomes, if it was only England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales that were those 4 data points of the drug deaths, that would be absolutely fine. But the bigger your data set gets, you know, then the more detail is going to be in your text description. But fundamentally, the information that is available visibly and visually has to be available in an alternative way. Next one is, now this is an interesting one. This was a recent story that came up on the BBC, and it was about a prolific shoplifting gang. And when I first you can see that image. What it is, it's a map really, I suppose, and it's showing the different dots of the different areas where this shoplifting gang had hit. And just unveil the text description for me, Claire.
Sorry. Map of England and Wales showing locations targeted by a shoplifting gang. The map uses dots showing the location of different incidents. There are clusters of dots in Liverpool and up the northwest coast of England, one dot in Wrexham, Wales, dots across the north of England as far as up as Newcastle upon Tyne. There are also clusters in the West Midlands and a few spread out as far east as Norwich and as far south as Dorset.
Now, again, this wasn't something that I wrote. This was something that a BBC journalist had created after doing the training. And I thought, brilliant, that is really, really good, because all of the details there. But then I was looking at it and I was using generative AI to have a look at the image just to contrast and compare. And there is additional information that is in that image. It tells you that it was a 22-man strong gang. And I think it also tells you the time frame that it was happening. Now, I wasn't aware of that when I read the text description. So then I looked at the body of the piece, and that information wasn't available in the body of the piece either. So although on the face of it, this text description looks really, really good, and it is, and this is about progress over perfection. The fundamental thing to understand is that there is information still being conveyed visually. Quite important information, because the fact that there's 22 people in the gang is only being conveyed in that image. It's not anywhere else in the body of the piece or in the caption. So as good as that text description is, I would want to see either that additional detail of when the gangs were hitting and how many was in the gangs, also in the text description, or in the body of the piece. You need to think about everything in the round. Next one is yeah, and again, this is another really complex bar chart. And I think this is another good example. Again, I haven't written any of these. These have been written by other people. So Claire, unveil that one.
A bar chart showing the average number of lorries that have entered Gaza per day each month since October 2023. It highlights that about 500 mostly commercial lorries a day were entering before October. That fell to 9 a day in the first month of the war, and in September it was at the lowest number since then, at 53. The highest number was in April, when about 190 lorries entered every day. The data is provided by the UN, which says it doesn't have a complete data for commercial vehicles after 7th of May.
So I think that's a really good one. Again, there are going to be some data points missing, but we're moving towards a place where journalists that are putting these text descriptions and are creating these text descriptions have got a modicum of understanding of what it is that we're trying to achieve. This is about audiences. I keep saying that, through the lens of the audience. And historically in the past, all that would have said would be something like bar chart showing vehicles coming into Gaza. So it's not perfect yet by any means, but it's certainly moving in the right direction. And the BBC, I would say, is one of the best news organizations doing this, doing these text descriptions. The New York Times are very, very good at it as well. But I think the BBC is fantastic at what it's doing. Again, though, just think about the number of data points and how you would be able to convey that additional information, weave it in through the body of the piece if at all possible. But fundamentally, again, you can see that minimum that we're getting is what type of chart, what it is, and what the trend is. So very good. And also, I think you've got that extra level of detail there, that the information is from the UN, and the fact that there's no additional after the 7th of May, which is good. Next one. So the 5 different types of images we've been through decorative, we've been through informative, we've been through functional, we've been through images of text, and we've been through those complex images. And I know this is a whistle-stop tour, really. But I think it's worth touching on how we describe people. It's very easy for us as humans to infer something from our own lived experience. And that's what we mustn't do when we're describing anybody in an image. That goes, I guess, for gender. It could go for ethnicity, age, race, all those things. You know, if it is a story about somebody and you know that they're a young woman, or you know that they're like an elderly man, you could add that level of detail in. But it's where it becomes really nuanced and really subtle about not putting in your own conscious or unconscious bias into anything. At the BBC, for example, we have taken the decision not to describe anything to do with ethnicity unless it's something to do with a story and we're 100% clear, you know, what that person's ethnic origin is. It's got its downsides because you will not have people being represented and portrayed. The default, for example, might be that if you are a young black kid that is a screen reader user, you won't see yourself represented. And as journalists, we do choose images a lot of time, a lot of stock images for that incidental representation. But it's really, really difficult. And it's, as I say, it's as humans, it's what we do. We can look at an image, and because of our life experience, we will infer something. It's why images of Donald Trump are so interesting, or the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. There's an example, and I don't have it here, but there's an example that I sometimes cite, and I talk about it. About 18 months ago, there's an image of Suella Braverman coming out of the out of Downing Street, and an image had been taken of her with the Downing Street railings behind her head, and it looked like a wee pair of devil horns coming out of her head. And she was carrying a document, and the caption that went along with that image, the caption now, not the text description, said "the devil's in the detail." So that was a bit of a visual joke, and you're using the photo, using people's understanding of Suella Braverman along with the caption to say something about her character. Now, if you try to start explaining that in a text description, you veer off into editorializing, which we can't do. You rely an awful lot on people getting that in joke. And it's not ideal, it's not perfect at all not to have that in the text description, because you are being, in a way, exclusionary. But if you do start going down that route, you will editorialize. There's an example of Donald Trump when he was arrested. You remember there was the mugshot of him. Some US news orgs say that Donald Trump looking defeated. Other people, other text descriptions often were saying Donald Trump looking triumphant. So we have to be really careful about editorializing. But with that said, there is a lot that we can do. So did you open all them up, Claire? Sorry, yeah. To avoid editorializing, be aware of your own unconscious bias and do not assume anything. Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. So the next one we have is, so this is a really good example. The original text description of this just said Deeya, which is that young woman's name, Deeya, and hopefully you'll see that we can do a bit better than that. There's a story about her during COVID. She was a product designer at the University of Nottingham, and she designed these oat milk containers that you can see there in that image. Now, obviously, you can see visually that there is possibly from a different ethnic background. But because the story wasn't about that, the story was about how she invented these oat milk containers. We can't, under BBC guidelines, say anything about that. But Claire, you can unveil the description there.
A smiling deer, Halai, sits on a brown leather couch. She has long brown hair and is wearing a black t-shirt and round rimmed glasses. In front of her on a low table, which is just out of shot, are two cylindrical containers with lids, one white and one silver, both of which have cursive writing on them.
And so much more detail, so more richness than just deer. You know, and we don't have to veer into anything about their ethnicity. You know, we can give enough detail about it because the story isn't about that. As I say, it's not perfect, it's not ideal. Other news organizations are also really struggling with describing ethnicity. One time when you will see it described is within scripted content. So you might, on other news organizations or on the BBC, see something, if there's a new BBC drama, for example, and it has got a character who is known that they're West African or Southeast Asian, you will see that written in the text description. But for news, you won't. This is a really, really good point to understand here. Do not copy and paste your caption into the edit field of your text descriptions. They do very, very, very different jobs. And I see this time and time again where people will spend a lot of time crafting their, creating their caption, and then they'll just take it and copy and paste that into the edit field. A lot of content management systems, the BBC included, do have a bit of a backstop, an emergency functionality, I guess you would call it, that you cannot publish a piece unless that alt text edit text field or text description field has been populated. But what that means is sometimes people will just take the caption and copy and paste it, and other news organizations do it as well. A lot of times you will just get the file name. As a screen reader user, when you go over an image, you just get the file name. They haven't even bothered to put anything into it. So do not copy and paste that. That is one of my big, huge bugbears. Please do not do it. Let me go for top tips. And I think these come out one by one, Claire, do they? How would you describe the image to somebody on the phone? That is the biggest tip I can give you. If you were talking to your mum, your wife, your daughter, and you had an image in front of you, think back to that one of Dia. You wouldn't just say, oh yeah, I've got a picture of Dia, if your mum didn't know Dia. You know, you think about what is happening in that photo. How would you describe it to somebody that doesn't have it there in front of them, and somebody that's on the phone? Don't use image off or photo off, but do remember the visual library and those examples and those instances when you can use that additional piece of information. Remember code sketch off or line drawn off, but you don't need to use image off or photo off because that's a given with screen reader user. Use full words and sentences and pay attention to your grammar and your punctuation. It's something that is, it sounds very obvious, but you would not hopefully publish something that hasn't gone through a spell checker. But a lot of times your text description doesn't go through that spell checker, but make sure that you are given the same amount of consideration to those text descriptions, because as I mentioned earlier, by adding richness, you're saying, yep, we see you, screen reader users, and we value you. By not checking your spelling, or having lots of typos in your text description, or not having punctuation. It's saying the same thing, but in a negative way. I would say, you know, we understand that we'll have to do this, but we don't really care. Don't use the same, if you're using the same image in different stories, you mightn't, don't just copy and paste the alt text, your text description from it, because it might be in a very different context. You might not have to have as much detail in it. You might have to have a lot more. So just think about what else is available in the piece. You know, remember back to that example of the terms and conditions, that you would need to have all of that text in your text description from that screenshot of the terms and conditions on X. But if it was in the body of the piece, you wouldn't. So if you were using that again in a piece that did have it already there, you wouldn't need to put it into your text description. If it didn't, you would have to think about it in a different way. So just always be mindful. Don't just copy and paste, even if it has a text description. Think about what it is that you're putting it into, and if you have to treat it differently in any way. And I guess I've said this quite a lot. It's about audiences. You know, when I have been trying to get buy-in from senior leadership about this, when I was first talking about this as accessibility, there was a lot of glazed looks. But the minute you start talking about things through the lens of an audience and understanding this is about audience reach, especially at a time when everybody is in real huge competition for eyeballs, for audiences, if you can go above and beyond and a bit further than other news organizations, you're going to promote loyalty, and you're going to show people that you really care about them as audiences, and you're not just doing this as a tick box really to adhere to your compliance. The basic fundamental guidelines that we should be adhering to is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2. That's called WCAG, but we should be going further in compliance, a lot further. And we should be considering all of our audiences. And any news orgs that you work for, you would have a lot of audience data. It's all about audiences. But when I talk to senior leaders about it, they go, "Oh yeah, when you say audiences, that makes sense." So always consider your audience. And I guess the last thing really is practice. This isn't going to come easy. It's not. On the face of it, describing an image might sound like, the most simplest things in the world. But the truth is, it's not. It's an art form. It's not a science. There's no right or wrong way to do it, because there's so many different nuances and so many different subtleties to it. But if you always keep in mind at all time your audience, no matter how they're accessing your content, you won't go far wrong. So yeah, practice. And have I got a final slide, or is that it?
You've got an additional resources slide.
Yeah, that hasn't come up on mine. Okay, so there you go. That's additional resources. That's if you really do want spend about 3 hours reading my full research paper, feel free. And also the BBC guidelines, they have been published externally. I was really keen that all news organizations benefit from this guidance. So that's it, really. I know that was a bit of a whistle stop through all of those different images, and it's a lot to take in all in one go. But by all means, feel free to ask me any questions. I think during that, did something come into the chat at one point?
Yes, so there's a comment from Maya that says, "My boss told me I was overdoing the richness."
I think I love this. Thank you, Maya. Right. Your boss is wrong. I will tell you that And it's something that you can bring back to your boss, May, that no blind person will ever tell you that there's too much detail, that there's too much richness. In my experience, that is said by people who can see, who don't need to have that richness in their text description. And that's no slight on your boss, that's just the way it is. But something for you to bring back to your boss, he or she, is that in the same way that you or your boss or people who can see skim read, a screen reader user will skim read as well. You know, I will go down through something really, really quickly. And if there's a lot more information in text description that I need at that point, I will go on past it and I can cursor on past it. But the point is that it's there if I do want it. So you can bring that back to your boss and say, no, richness is good. Thank you, Siobhan. And I'll just say about that level of richness, there was, I should have had that at the end of the presentation, but there was a piece that Newsbeat did maybe about 18 months ago. No, maybe about 6 months ago. And it was the most detailed text description I'd ever read in my life. Like it was lines and lines and lines, and it was a character from the World of Warcraft, and somebody had spent ages on their text description of it. And it was somebody who I know through doing all of this stuff around text descriptions and accessibility, and she is the director of the board of, or she's the chair, sorry, of the board of directors for the World Wide Web Consortium, who are the gatekeepers and arbiters of accessibility standards on the web. And it was her that flagged it to me as the best ever text description that she'd read, and she is a screen reader user. So that was massively, massively over the top, full of richness. But the chair of the board of directors of W3C says it was the best she's ever read, so that's good enough for me. So any more questions?
Paula here.
Paula?
Paula Garrity, how you doing, love?
Living the dream, living the dream.
Good on you.
No, that was incredible. I learned so much. Wow. I'm just trying to just have a couple of questions. I've been trying to do by increasing awareness of alt text. Like now Twitter invites you to write alt text. And this is on my personal account rather than work, and I've not used it. I've done it on Instagram, but I've never been able to read it, and I wasn't aware that when it's on Instagram, do screen readers pick that up, or are you able to click and read the alt text? It's just a technical, because I've been doing it very I don't know the word, what you do, very intermittently. So it's like donating blood. You don't know if it's going anywhere or if anybody reading it, but you do it with the best of intentions. So I'm just wondering, like, so technically, how does it work on things like Instagram when you put in the alt text? How do people actually read it? Because I put it in and I was asking for feedback and didn't get any.
Well, there are two schools of thought here, Paula, because you're right. It will be people that are just using a screen reader, let that be on a laptop or on their phone. So on the phone, I will use voiceover. So anybody can put the voiceover on, but it's a bit of a learning curve if you're not used to it. So you'll be able to see if it's there.
Okay.
But there is a school of thought to say that, and the UK government have started doing this, in that they don't put a text description on any of their images, on any of their government web pages. They put a photo ID underneath it, which is an alt text, but they're thinking around that. And there's pros and cons to it, is that there's going to be people that will benefit. Say if it's a chart, for example, having a really good detailed description, the narrative description is going to be good for people that have got other cognitive differences, dyscalculia or something like that. They're really bad with numbers. So the government have taken that decision that they don't have an alt text. So you could, if you wanted to, just do a description and say beside your image that you do photo ID, and then just describe what it is. And a lot of people do that for quickness as well, because to be honest, the faff that you have to do on social media these days to sometimes put that in, you know, it's a pain in the backside. And I even say that to somebody who uses it. You know, a lot of times I will just say photo ID of, you know, and then what the photo is, rather than have to go into the functionality and technical bits of it to put in the text description.
And then there's just one other thing, like clearly one of the I'm a photographer, so I'm just
Yeah.
thinking in terms of writing. I get the whole thing, the difference between captions and text, and I've been archiving stuff, and so for the archive there's an image description, and somebody else who runs the archive, it's the Digital Repository Ireland, they've been doing it, and the quality of image description, which I would describe as alt text, is not consistent, shall we say.
Oh, is that for search? Is that for search functionality rather than describing what it is? So it's those
No.
keywords.
No, it's not keywording. Keywording is different again.
Right.
So it's just the image description. It's a part of the archiving process.
Right.
So if people can't see the image, they know. Sorry, I'm stating the bleeding obvious there. But I'm trying to think backwards. And in terms of the culture and practice, like photographers struggle to get the caption done and send that off, and the metadata. But I'm just trying to think, is there kind of a best practice or standard around which Photoshop metadata field something like that could actually go into, in terms of beginning the conversation around that as best practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, and I don't use Photoshop, so I don't know what the metadata fields are labeled as, but if there is something like image description, you just put a bit in there. But I would say that journalists shouldn't. So say if journalists are going into that repository of photos, they shouldn't use the image description that is there. I would say that's just a sort of an indicator as to what it is, because again, remember what I had said about using it in different contexts. You might have a photo that has got an image description of, I don't know, like, you know, a bus going down O'Connell Street in Dublin or something, and it might be there as a stock image. You've just done a story about the riots in Dublin, right? So you could just say something like that. But if it was a story about the type of bus it was, you would want to have a lot more detail in your text description to convey what type of bus that was. You know, so there's going to be different instances that you're going to have different levels of detail. You know, so it's not just about the visual experience, but it's about what that mood or information is that you in the image that you're trying to convey.
That's fantastic. I get that. Thank you very much, Johny.
That's all right. No worries. Good questions.
Johny, I have a question. It's Paulina here.
Hello, Paulina.
If you have, I have a couple of questions actually. The one is that if you have text in the image, it's not extensive, or if there is a particular text that needs to be highlighted, for example, if there is, say, a cartoon which contains text, about including that text in the description, I've normally put it in like single inverted commas, that excerpt of text into the description. Is that basically correct?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. And it's not imperative at all times to have, you know, say if you've just got I don't know what the example would be, if you've got a photo of a house and outside it, you know, and it's just a stock image of a house in a street, just, you know, and you're just doing it as your top image in a story. But in one of the houses next door, there's a for sale sign. You wouldn't have to you wouldn't have to say that, for example, if it wasn't pertinent to the story.
Yeah.
But if it was a story about a house that the people couldn't sell because it was haunted or something like that, you would want to say that it was a picture of the house with a for sale sign outside it, because that's relevant to what it is you're trying to get across. You know what I mean? So again, that's about context. So if you remember back to that image of the really busy image that showed the screenshot of the Genesis website, there was an FBI agent, and you could see him wearing a hoodie, and it said FBI across the back of it. You know, it wasn't vital for the understanding of that story for that to be included. So again, this is where you have to think as the journalist, as the creator, what is the reason for you choosing that particular image? What is the information in that image that you really think is important to the overall understanding of your piece? And if it is that it is an FBI agent with a hoodie, it's really crucial for you to understand that. Then that goes in the text description. The same for what you were talking about, the text in an image of a cartoon or something like that. So it's up to you as a journalist to decide why you're using that image and those text bits in it that a screen reader can't pick up. Should you include it or not?
Yeah. The other thing, and it's a bugbear of mine, is that PDF documents don't give you an option to create a text description. So on the website, I would always have text descriptions, you know, with any images that I put. But if it is in a PDF, say magazine, then there isn't that option. So what would you say would be a good solution for that, if there is no functionality like that?
Put it in, and as again, as I guess what I was saying to Paula, use it as a photo ID inside the body of your piece. PDFs are notoriously bad for accessibility. There is ways to do it, but you have to take time to remediate through them. So if I'm understanding you right, Paulina, it's that you have just got a page that is a PDF that is just the image off a page, is that right?
No, let's say it's a page with text. Let's say a page with the text of an article, but it also contains an image.
Yeah.
So if you distribute some of what you publish in a PDF format, then you come across that problem.
Yeah, well that's just a PDF then, isn't it? You would, if it was just a PDF and it had the text and the image in it, there is a way to put a text description, alt text in that PDF. But it's fiddly and it takes a while. I would say just do it in a Word document and make sure that you've got a text description in there.
So Siobhan's asked about QR codes. So those are often used to convey information. What's your view on that?
QR codes are a different accessibility consideration. They're really good, but they're only good if you know they're there and you know where to point them. You can, for example, you wouldn't know if you're going down through a page, you know, if I was cursing down through a page that there was a QR code unless it was clearly labeled as such. You know, I'd use QR codes, but I would label them, you know, QR code, use this QR code to do this. But also for belt and braces of accessibility, Siobhan, I would include the URL or a link to where that QR code is going to take you as well.
Thank you. And then we also had a question. Are many visually impaired people on Instagram, active on Instagram?
I don't use Instagram, so I don't know. But I'm old. But I do know that it is accessible. A lot of people do use it. Yeah. TikTok's massive. So any social media, like, you know, it depends on the accessibility of the platform. Facebook certainly it's had its ups and downs. Twitter historically was really good, but when the spaceman took over, he got rid of all of the accessibility team, and it went a wee bit downhill. But Twitter was brilliant, and it was Twitter that introduced that nudge that I think it was Paula you mentioned, that you can toggle on and off, like your reminder. So if you're going to post an image that doesn't have a text description, alt text put into it, it'll say, are you sure you want to post this without putting an alt text in? Alt text is really good for blind and visually impaired screen reader users. So it really all depends on the platform. LinkedIn has got ways to put in the alt text, the text descriptions, but it's got a lot of shortcomings as well. I've been talking to people about getting functionality for the alt text in your photo. Yeah, Alistair, I see what you mean. Instagram is, yeah, there is, in exactly the same way as Paula said. There is functionality within Instagram to be able to put it in, but it's a bit of a faff. And I think a lot of social media platforms need to be aware of that, if they want it to become more widespread, then they have to make it easier. And that's why a lot of people, you will see, people will put in photo ID. So it's beneficial for everybody, but it's also that it saves a bit of time having to go into the back end functionality of it.
I think also, Johnny, you mentioned, people with cognitive impairments find descriptions useful as well. So, sometimes we might just miss an important detail because we're not aware of a reference or, visual reference or just what something is. So that can still be useful. Yeah.
And I should have said it as well. That your text description, your alt text has got additional benefits. People will be aware of SEO, search engine optimization, and using your keywords. That your text description goes towards that SEO. Your SEO will scrape that text description field and find those keywords. So if you're searching for something, if you've done something really, really good within your text description that's relevant to your story and you want your story to be found, think about that. Think about the keywords. If you are using search analytic tools, you're like Google Trends or something like that, and you're doing a story based on that, make sure to include that. As long as it's relevant, you don't want word soup in your text description, but as long as it's relevant to the image, that's really, really going to help your piece go up the search engine rankings. And at the end of the day, as journalists, that's what we want, isn't it? We want people to read our stuff, so the easier that you make it to be found, then the better it is for everyone. And it's also really useful for people and this is worthwhile understanding. Say if you're on a train and you're in a slow network bandwidth, it'll be the text description that comes up if the photo can't load. So the more detailed that text description is, the more people you're going to reach, who mightn't ordinarily use a screen reader, but because their bandwidth is really, really low, that is what they're getting of that image that you've put up. It's not loading, so they're getting just that text that you've included.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I'm conscious we've run over. It's been incredibly informative. You've been absolutely brilliant, Johnny. I've learned so much.
Thank you.
And we are, very appreciative of being able to pick your very excellent brains on this issue. So thank you ever so much.